There is a profound, breathtaking beauty in the dry, sun-baked expanse of the southern plains that city dwellers can absolutely never understand. It is a land that does not yield its treasures to the weak, nor does it reward those who simply complain about the heat. It rewards patience, unyielding resilience, and a deep, quiet understanding of the earth. Clara Montgomery understood this language perfectly. At 42 years old, Clara was a woman beautifully sculpted by the sun and the wind. Her dark hair, heavily threaded with striking silver, was usually tied back with a simple leather string, and her hands were gracefully calloused from years of tending to the vast golden fields of the Oakhaven Ranch. It was late afternoon, the magnificent golden hour, when the scorching southern sun finally began to mellow, painting the vast rolling hills in brilliant fiery strokes of orange and violet. Clara was standing in the dry, dusty yard, rhythmically grinding golden corn in a heavy stone mortar. As she worked, she sang an old, soulful folk song, a traditional melody passed down through generations of pioneer women who had tamed this very valley. Her voice was rich, melodic, and deeply comforting, floating through the warm air. When the summer sun bakes the red clay dry, the deepest roots will never die. We pull the water from the stone and build our castles out of bone. Working quietly beside her was Clara, a beautiful, bright-eyed 19-year-old girl. Clara had taken the orphaned girl in a decade ago, raising her not as a servant, but as a beloved daughter. They shared a peaceful, rhythmic harmony, finding genuine joy in the simple, honest labor of the day. But in the late 19th century frontier, a peaceful, independent ranch run entirely by women was a very rare, highly coveted prize, especially when a severe 10-year drought was violently squeezing the life out of the neighboring megafarms. The rhythmic sound of the grinding stone was suddenly interrupted by the heavy, aggressive thud of approaching horse hooves. A polished, incredibly expensive black carriage, completely out of place on the dusty, rugged frontier roads, rolled into the yard. It belonged to Silas Vance, the wealthiest, most ruthless cattle baron in the entire territory. Silas did not burst out of the carriage screaming or making a violent scene. He was a man who preferred to execute his hostile takeovers with a polite, sickeningly sweet smile and a completely suffocating legal trap. Silas stepped down, adjusting his expensive tailored vest, his silver-tipped cane sinking slightly into the dry dirt. He walked up to the wooden porch, offering Clara a patronizing, entirely fake smile. "Good evening, Clara." "Still fighting the dust, I see," Silas drawled smoothly, his sharp eyes scanning the property with a greedy, calculating hunger. "I will get straight to the point. The drought is getting worse, and your modest little ranch happens to sit directly in the center of the valley's natural cattle corridor. It is completely absurd for a woman to manage this alone. I am here to offer you a very generous, permanent solution to your struggles." Clara did not stop grinding the corn. She simply looked up, her dark eyes entirely unbothered, radiating a quiet, terrifying authority. "I wasn't aware I was struggling, Silas. But do go on. I always enjoy a good piece of fiction before supper." Silas chuckled, a cold, hollow sound. "I am offering a formal alliance, Clara. A permanent merging of our deeds. My eldest son, Thomas, is looking for a wife. Young Clara here is of marrying age. I propose an arranged marriage. Your girl gets the profound security of the Vance family name, and in exchange I take over the legal management of Oakhaven. It is a brilliant, traditional arrangement. Everyone wins, and you avoid losing this farm to the bank when the wells finally run completely dry. If you absolutely love Clara's quiet strength and her refusal to be bullied by a wealthy baron, please hit the like button right now. Type "strong roots" in the comments to support her, and let us know what country you are listening from today. Clara finally stopped her work. She wiped her hands on her heavy canvas apron and stepped forward, placing herself securely between the wealthy cattle baron and the young girl. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words carried the heavy, undeniable weight of a falling mountain. "You are barking up the wrong tree, Silas," Clara said, her voice smooth, poetic, and absolutely lethal. "You do not want my daughter, and you certainly do not care about tradition. You have been studying the old geological surveys, haven't you? You know that Oakhaven sits directly on top of the ancient, deep limestone aquifer. You are running out of water, and you are desperately trying to steal mine through a rigged marriage contract." Silas's fake smile completely vanished, his face tightening with a furious, ugly shock. He had severely underestimated the brilliant, deeply educated mind of the woman standing before him. "I would rather sell dry dust to the wind than sell my daughter to a fool," Clara stated, her chin held high. "Get off my land, Silas. Oak Haven is not for sale and our hearts are absolutely not for trade." Silas Vance did not leave Oak Haven quietly. Before his heavy carriage rattled away in a thick, suffocating cloud of southern dust, he delivered a cold, venomous promise that he would use every ounce of his massive political influence in the nearby town to completely block Clara's access to bank loans, seed merchants and basic supplies. He fully intended to starve her out, believing that the harsh, brutal mechanics of the terrible drought would eventually force the stubborn woman to her knees. But Silas fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the woman he was dealing with. Clara was not going to wait for the sky to rain. She was going to actively tear the water straight out of the belly of the earth. The very next morning, long before the fierce southern sun had even crested the jagged eastern ridge, Clara saddled her sturdy brown mare. She rode into the bustling, dusty frontier town of Red Creek, not to beg the corrupt local bankers for a fragile extension on her non-existent debts, but to seek out a very specific, legendary man. In the late 19th century, the science of hydrogeology, the profound study of underground water distribution, was completely revolutionizing the dry, desperate frontiers. While ignorant, superstitious cattle barons relied entirely on shallow surface streams, educated engineers knew that massive pressurized oceans of pure freezing water lay trapped beneath thick layers of impermeable rock. To reach them, one did not need a simple shovel. One needed a brilliant, fearless mind and a massive, heavy iron drill. Clara walked purposefully toward the loud, metallic clanging echoing from the back of the town's large blacksmith and engineering yard. There, standing over a massive wooden table covered entirely in complex, hand-drawn geological maps and heavy iron drill bits, was Elias Thorne. Elias was 50 years old, a veteran well digger and master hydraulic engineer. He was a tall, powerfully built man, his broad shoulders and muscular arms forged by decades of brutal, unyielding labor in the sun. His thick, dark hair was heavily salted with gray, and his rugged, deeply tanned face bore the quiet, intelligent calm of a man who spent his life listening to the secrets of the earth. He wore a heavy canvas shirt, the sleeves rolled up, and leather suspenders over his dusty trousers. He did not look like the arrogant, soft-handed men of the city. He looked like the rugged, magnificent embodiment of the frontier itself. Elias looked up as Clara approached. His striking, pale blue eyes, a startling contrast against his sun-darkened skin, locked onto hers. He didn't offer a crude, dismissive comment, nor did he look at her with the arrogant surprise most men showed when a woman walked into an engineering yard. He simply wiped his heavy, calloused hands on a cloth, recognizing the fierce, undeniable intelligence radiating from her dark eyes. "You are Clara Montgomery," Elias rumbled, his voice incredibly deep, rich, and possessing a gentle rhythmic cadence that instantly put the loud, chaotic yard at peace. "The woman who famously told Silas Vance to go buy a ticket to the moon. Half the town is whispering about your spectacular standoff on the porch. How can I help you, ma'am?" Clara smiled, a genuine, warm expression that beautifully illuminated her face. "I am not here to gossip about greedy cattle barons, Mr. Thorne. I am here to talk about artesian pressure." Elias raised a thick eyebrow, a slow, incredibly handsome smile spreading across his rugged face. He stepped closer to the table, tapping a heavy, scarred finger against a complex geological cross-section drawn on the parchment. "Most people in this town think water simply falls from the sky and flows downhill," Elias murmured, his voice thick with a profound, shared passion for the science of the land. "They do not understand that beneath the thick limestone shelf, water is trapped under massive, unimaginable pressure. If you drill perfectly through the caprock, you don't even need a pump. The pressure forces the water violently to the surface, creating an eternal, flowing fountain in the middle of a desert. An artesian well." "Exactly," Clara said, stepping right up to the table, looking deeply into his pale blue eyes. "Oak Haven sits directly on the lowest point of the valley's subterranean basin. I don't just have a small pocket of water, Elias. I have the entire pressurized heart of the aquifer beneath my boots. But Silas Vance is going to blockade my farm. I need to strike that water, and I need to do it before the end of the month to secure the legal water rights for the entire valley. I need your drills and I need your mind. If your heart is melting watching two brilliant, mature souls connect over their shared love and knowledge of the earth, hit that like button. Type true partners in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to follow this beautiful journey. Elias did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He looked at the elegant, resilient woman who spoke of geology with the passion of a poet, and he felt a sudden, powerful shift in his chest. For years he had been a solitary wanderer, digging wells for men who only cared about the money the water would bring. Here finally was a woman who actually respected the magic of the deep earth. "The drilling is incredibly dangerous, Clara," Elias whispered, his large, warm hand gently touching the edge of the map near hers. "If we hit the pressurized chamber incorrectly, the blowout could destroy the rig entirely. It will be a filthy, exhausting, and utterly terrifying fight against the stone." Clara didn't flinch. She simply turned her hand, her knuckles lightly, boldly brushing against his calloused fingers. "I have never been afraid of a little dirt, Elias. Are you going to help me build an oasis, or are you going to let Silas Vance turn this beautiful valley into dust?" Elias laughed, a rich, booming sound of pure joy. "I will load the heavy iron wagons tonight, Clara. We ride for Oak Haven at dawn." The arrival of Elias Thorne's heavy engineering caravan at Oak Haven Ranch was not a quiet, subtle affair. It was a magnificent, thunderous declaration of war against the suffocating, relentless drought. As the very first rays of the pale morning sun crested the jagged eastern ridge, casting long bruised shadows across the dry, cracking earth, a procession of massive, heavily reinforced wooden wagons rolled into the dusty yard. They were pulled by teams of muscular, steaming draft horses, their massive hooves kicking up thick clouds of red southern dust. The wagons were loaded entirely with colossal blackened iron gears, thick coils of heavy hemp rope, and the towering, disassembled wooden beams of a massive drilling derrick. Clara stood on the sturdy wooden porch of her ranch house, holding a steaming cup of dark chicory coffee, watching the magnificent arrival with a profound, breathtaking sense of hope. 4 months, the oppressive, relentless heat had slowly drained the vibrant life from her beautiful land, turning the once green pastures into a brittle, golden wasteland. But today, the deafening, metallic clanking of the iron tools dropping onto the dry dirt sounded like an absolute symphony of survival. Elias leaped down from the lead wagon, his heavy leather boots hitting the ground with a solid, reassuring thud. He didn't waste a single second barking useless, arrogant orders at his crew of 6 rugged, sun-baked men. He moved with the quiet, deliberate grace of a seasoned symphony conductor, his massive, calloused hands guiding the heavy iron drill bits and positioning the colossal wooden derrick directly over the precise geographical depression Clara had identified on her complex maps. "We are completely on the clock, boys," Elias rumbled, his deep, resonant voice carrying clearly over the chaotic noise of the yard. "Silas Vance has his corrupt men watching us from the upper ridge, hoping we break our backs on the bedrock. We are going to drill perfectly through the hard limestone cap, and we are not going to stop until we hit the pressurized ocean beneath. We dig until the earth sings." The physical labor required to operate a late 19th century percussion drill was a brutal, bone-breaking marathon of pure human endurance. A massive heavy iron chisel weighing hundreds of pounds was repeatedly hoisted high into the air by the wooden derrick and then dropped violently into the earth, slowly, agonizingly crushing the dense rock beneath. It was a rhythmic, punishing cycle of lifting and dropping, requiring absolute, flawless synchronization from the men working the heavy ropes and the steam-powered winch. Clara did not retreat to the cool, shaded sanctuary of her parlor while the men worked. She tied a heavy canvas apron around her waist, rolled up the sleeves of her practical linen dress, and waded directly into the chaotic, dusty heart of the operation. She carried heavy wooden buckets of precious, carefully rationed water to cool the smoking, violently hot iron drill bits, her face smeared with sweat and dark earth. As the fierce southern sun climbed aggressively to its highest, most punishing peak, the grueling, repetitive labor threatened to completely drain the morale of the exhausted crew. But Clara, understanding the deep, spiritual power of the frontier, stepped up to the massive wooden platform of the derrick. She raised her rich, melodic voice, initiating a traditional rhythmic working chant that had echoed across the plains for generations. "Swing the iron, break the stone, we build our kingdom out of bone. The river sleeps deep in the dark, but we will bring the waters spark." The exhausted men immediately caught the beautiful, driving rhythm. Their voices joined hers, a deep, resonant and incredibly powerful masculine chorus that perfectly matched the violent, rhythmic thudding of the heavy iron drill dropping into the earth. The song completely transformed the brutal, agonizing labor into a unified, triumphant march. If you are completely captivated by the beautiful, powerful harmony of Clara and the drilling crew fighting against the drought, hit the like button right now. Type, "break the stone," in the comments to give them strength. And don't forget to subscribe to follow this incredible journey. Elias stood near the massive turning wooden gears, completely coated in sweat and red dust, his striking pale blue eyes locked entirely onto Clara. He had worked with hundreds of tough, desperate men across the vast, untamed frontiers, but he had never, in his 50 years of life, witnessed a woman command a heavy engineering site with such profound, effortless and breathtaking grace. She was not just a wealthy landowner hiring a crew. She was the absolute, undeniable and brilliant heart of the entire operation. He walked slowly over to her, his massive broad-shouldered frame blocking the harsh, blinding sunlight. He reached out, his thick, scarred fingers gently taking the heavy water-filled wooden bucket from her blistered, exhausted hands. "You are going to completely exhaust yourself before we even breach the first layer of limestone, Clara," Elias murmured, his deep voice vibrating with a fierce, protective and overwhelmingly tender admiration. Clara looked up at the towering, rugged engineer, her dark eyes shining with a fierce, unbreakable brilliance. "I am not going to rest, Elias. Not until I see the water wash the arrogant, greedy smile right off Silas Vance's face. We are going to strike the deep aquifer and we are going to do it together." For 14 grueling, agonizing days, the heavy iron drill battered relentlessly against the stubborn ancient limestone cap buried deep beneath the sun-baked earth of Oakhven Ranch. The punishing, completely unforgiving heat of the severe southern drought had reached its absolute terrifying peak. The vast, rolling golden fields were completely parched, the dry, cracked soil practically begging for a single fragile drop of rain. The constant, deafening metallic thud of the massive percussion drill echoing across the silent, dying valley had become the steady, desperate heartbeat of Clara's entire existence. But on the afternoon of the 15th day, the rhythmic, familiar sound of the heavy iron violently striking solid rock suddenly and dramatically changed. Elias, standing completely covered in thick gray rock dust by the towering wooden derrick, immediately raised his massive, calloused hand, signaling the exhausted crew to stop the steam-powered winch. The heavy iron drill bit did not hit solid, unyielding stone. It produced a strange, hollow, incredibly deep echoing thud, followed by a terrifying violent shudder that violently shook the massive wooden platform. The thick, heavy hemp rope holding the massive iron drill suddenly went completely, alarmingly slack. They had successfully broken through the final, thickest layer of the impenetrable limestone caprock. They had reached the absolute dark void of the subterranean cavern. Before Elias could safely secure the heavy iron casing, the loud, aggressive rattling of an approaching carriage completely shattered the tense, breathless silence of the yard. Silas Vance, the ruthless, greedy cattle baron, rolled onto the property in his polished, expensive black carriage, accompanied by 2 armed, intimidating ranch hands. He stepped down into the thick dust, leaning heavily on his silver-tipped cane, an expression of supreme, arrogant victory completely plastered across his cruel, wealthy face. He had watched the grueling, exhausting drilling operation from the distant ridge for 2 weeks, and he had come to officially collect his coveted prize, entirely convinced that Clara had finally failed and bankrupted her estate. "Well, Clara," Silas sneered, his voice dripping with a sickening, patronizing venom as he walked toward the towering wooden derrick. "It seems your foolish, expensive little engineering experiment has completely hit rock bottom. The deadline for the regional water rights expires at sunset today. You have absolutely no water, your land is entirely worthless, and your stubborn pride has ruined you. I have the marriage contract for your daughter right here. Sign it now, surrender the legal deed to Oakhven, and I will graciously save you from starvation." Clara stood firmly at the base of the massive drilling rig, her heavy canvas apron covered in gray dust and dark mud. She did not look at the arrogant, wealthy baron with fear or defeat. She looked at him with an expression of absolute, freezing pity. She knew with a profound, terrifying scientific certainty exactly what was currently happening hundreds of feet beneath their boots. "You are a remarkably ignorant man, Silas," Clara said, her voice perfectly calm, smooth and chillingly polite, carrying clearly over the sudden low, terrifying rumbling sound that was beginning to vibrate violently through the soles of their boots. You understand absolutely nothing about the massive, unimaginable pressure of the deep earth. I suggest you step back before my land completely ruins your expensive, tailored silk suit. Silas frowned, his cruel, arrogant smile faltering slightly as the deep, low rumbling rapidly escalated into a deafening, terrifying roar. The massive heavy iron drill bit was suddenly violently ejected from the deep, narrow borehole, shooting high into the air like a discarded toy, crashing heavily into the dust. And then the true magnificent magic of the deep artesian basin was finally unleashed. A colossal, breathtaking pillar of pure, crystal-clear, freezing water violently erupted from the earth. Driven by the massive, unimaginable subterranean pressure of the trapped aquifer, the spectacular geyser shot 40 feet into the hot southern sky, exploding into a brilliant, sparkling curtain of heavy, life-saving rain. The sheer, deafening roar of the rushing water was absolute, unadulterated music. If you are literally cheering right now as Clara's brilliant well explodes with water, completely destroying the greedy Baron's evil plan, smash the like button. Type "Fountain of Life" in the comments to claim her ultimate victory. Silas Vance stumbled backward, completely overwhelmed by the violent explosion of water. His expensive tailored suit was instantly, thoroughly soaked in freezing mud and wet dust. The realization hit him like a physical, crushing blow. Yet absolutely nothing. Clara possessed the most powerful, eternal and massive water source in the entire drought-stricken territory. She had completely legally secured the valley, and his massive cattle empire was entirely at her mercy. He scrambled pathetically back into his carriage, completely humiliated, and fled the property as the drilling crew erupted into deafening, joyous cheers. Elias did not look at the fleeing, defeated Baron. The giant, rugged engineer walked directly into the heavy, freezing downpour of the magnificent artesian geyser. He walked toward Clara, who was standing completely soaked, her dark, silver-threaded hair plastered to her beautiful face, laughing with an absolute, profound and radiant joy. He reached out, his massive, warm, calloused hands gently pulling her close, entirely ignoring the freezing water cascading over their shoulders. "You broke the stone, Clara," Elias murmured, his deep voice thick with overwhelming, tender devotion. "You brought the absolute ocean to the desert." Clara smiled, her dark eyes shining brilliantly, her hands resting on his strong, soaked chest. "We pulled it from the dark, Elias. Together." He leaned down, capturing her lips in a slow, deep, profoundly romantic kiss that tasted of sweet, pure water and the absolute, unshakable certainty of their beautiful shared victory. The violent, magnificent eruption of the artesian well did not merely bring freezing, life-saving water to the sun-baked, desperate soil of Oakhaven Ranch. It completely, fundamentally altered the harsh political and social landscape of the entire southern frontier. For 3 long, grueling weeks following the spectacular blowout, the deafening roar of the heavy iron drilling equipment was entirely replaced by the beautiful, rhythmic and continuous rushing of the newly formed river. Clara Montgomery had not simply survived the devastating 10-year drought that was violently choking the territory, she had miraculously, undeniably conquered it. Elias Thorne, the towering, rugged master engineer, did not pack up his heavy wooden wagons and leave once the deep aquifer was breached. He stayed, his massive calloused hands working tirelessly alongside Clara and her bright-eyed daughter Elias, to construct a brilliant, sprawling network of deep wooden irrigation sluices and heavy stone troughs. The transformation of the parched, golden wasteland was absolutely breathtaking. The dry, cracked red clay drank the cold, pure water with a desperate, greedy thirst, and within a matter of days vibrant, thick emerald green shoots began to aggressively push their way through the dirt. The dying, brittle pastures were completely resurrected, transforming Oakhaven into a sprawling, lush, unimaginable oasis in the very heart of the barren, dusty plains. But the miraculous, undeniable return of the green grass brought a completely different, highly unexpected challenge to Clara's wooden porch. The wealthy, arrogant neighboring cattle ranchers, men who had previously spent years blindly following Silas Vance and completely dismissing Clara as a fragile, helpless widow, were now facing absolute, terrifying financial ruin. Their shallow surface creeks had completely dried to dust, and their massive, expensive herds of cattle were dying of thirst by the hundreds. The arrogant, powerful men of the valley were suddenly forced to swallow their massive, fragile egos and make the humiliating, dusty ride to Oakhaven Ranch. One incredibly hot, suffocating Tuesday afternoon, a procession of 5 wealthy ranchers rode slowly into Clara's vibrant green yard. They dismounted, their expensive leather boots covered in dry white dust, holding their wide-brimmed hats respectfully in their hands. They looked like defeated, exhausted soldiers surrendering to an undisputed queen. Clara stood on her wide, sturdy wooden porch, wearing a clean, beautifully tailored linen dress, her dark, silver-threaded hair blowing gently in the cool, moist breeze rolling off her new river. She did not look at them with the cruel, vengeful arrogance that Silas Vance would have used. She looked at them with a quiet, terrifying, and absolute authority. "We are completely out of options, Clara," muttered Horace Miller, an older, heavily sunburned rancher who had once laughed at her in the town square. He nervously twisted his expensive hat in his thick hands, looking absolutely humiliated. "Silas's wells are entirely bone dry, and he has completely locked down the northern creek. We are losing our cattle by the hour. We came to humbly ask if you would sell us access to your water. We are prepared to pay the piper whatever exorbitant price you demand." Clara walked slowly to the edge of the wooden porch, looking down at the desperate, wealthy men who had once conspired to starve her out. She held the absolute, unquestionable power of life and death over their massive empires in the palm of her hand. "I am not Silas Vance, gentlemen," Clara said, her voice perfectly smooth, melodic, and chillingly polite, carrying clearly over the gentle, beautiful sound of the rushing water behind her house. "I do not believe in holding a man's livelihood hostage simply to feed my own pathetic ego. You will have access to my water, and your cattle will absolutely not die of thirst on my watch." The ranchers let out a collective, profound sigh of overwhelming relief, their shoulders slumping in sheer gratitude. But before they could utter a single word of thanks, Clara raised her graceful hand, halting them completely. "However," Clara continued, her dark eyes narrowing with a fierce, unbreakable brilliance, "the days of Silas Vance completely dictating the wages, the trade routes, and the brutal laws of this valley are entirely over. If you want to drink from my well, you will officially break your alliances with him. You will pay your ranch hands a fair, generous living wage, and you will sign a binding, legal cooperative agreement ensuring that no small farmer is ever bullied out of their land again. You play by my new rules or you can go back to drinking dust." If you are completely cheering for Clara as she brilliantly turns the tables on the arrogant ranchers and completely rewrites the rules of the valley, hit that like button right now. Type "Queen of the Plains" in the comments to claim her ultimate victory. Let us know what country you are watching from today. The wealthy ranchers stared at her, utterly taken aback by her magnificent, terrifying, and brilliant statesmanship. They were expecting a greedy, extortionate price for the water. They were absolutely not expecting a complete moral revolution of the entire frontier. They didn't hesitate for a single fraction of a second. One by one, the powerful, defeated men eagerly nodded their heads, formally agreeing to her strict, compassionate terms. They had come begging for a fragile drop of water, and Clara had essentially brilliantly bought the loyalty of the entire territory without spending a single copper coin. While the sprawling, incredibly vibrant oasis of Oakhaven Ranch was humming with abundant life, profound joy, and a newly forged powerful community alliance, a very different, deeply toxic and suffocating atmosphere was rapidly consuming the massive neighboring empire of Silas Vance. The ruthless, greedy cattle baron had spent his entire life operating under the arrogant, entirely misguided belief that intimidation, corrupt wealth, and brutal monopolies were the only true currencies of the wild frontier. He had intentionally tried to crush Clara Montgomery, fully expecting her to break and surrender her precious daughter to his pathetic son in a desperate bid for survival. But his colossal, arrogant miscalculation had completely, spectacularly backfired, and now he was absolutely paying the ultimate, devastating price. Silas's massive, sprawling ranch, once the undisputed, terrifying crown jewel of the entire Southern Territory, had been reduced to a barren, cracking, and dusty wasteland. The severe, unforgiving 10-year drought had shown him absolutely no mercy. His shallow, poorly engineered wells had completely turned to dry, useless mud. Without the vital, life-saving water, his massive, incredibly expensive herds of premium cattle were dropping dead by the hundreds beneath the punishing, scorching southern sun. The financial collapse of his brutal empire was not a slow, gentle, polite decline. It was a violent, highly public and completely terrifying freefall that sent shockwaves through the distant city banks. But the absolute final nail in the coffin was not the loss of his precious cattle. It was the complete, humiliating loss of his terrifying power over the local people. When Clara Montgomery brilliantly opened her massive artesian well to the neighboring farms, stipulating that they must pay fair, generous wages and completely sever their ties with Silas to access the water, she essentially orchestrated a bloodless, magnificent revolution. Silas's deeply underpaid, brutally overworked ranch hands, completely disgusted by his cruel temper and failing wealth, abandoned his property in droves, packing their meager belongings and riding eagerly toward the booming, prosperous green fields of Oak Haven. Silas was currently sitting on the wide, shaded veranda of his massive, decaying mansion, his expensive, pristine silk suit completely failing to hide the desperate, terrifying panic violently contorting his heavily sunburned face. He clutched a crystal glass of expensive imported whiskey in his trembling, sweating hand, staring out at the devastating, dusty graveyard that used to be his impenetrable kingdom. He was completely, devastatingly alone. His cowardly son Thomas had already packed his velvet trunks and fled on the morning train to the eastern cities, entirely unwilling to face the looming, terrifying mountain of unpaid bank debts and furious, aggressively knocking creditors. Silas had spent his entire life ruthlessly digging graves for innocent people, completely unaware that he had just expertly, brilliantly dug his own. Meanwhile, completely insulated from the toxic, collapsing ruin of Silas Vance, a profound, breathtaking peace had comfortably settled over the lush, emerald-green pastures of Oak Haven Ranch. The violent, chaotic noise of the heavy iron drilling equipment was a distant memory, replaced entirely by the gentle, musical rushing of the deep irrigation canals and the soft, comforting evening songs of the local birds returning to the valley. It was late afternoon on a crisp, brilliant autumn day. The fierce, punishing southern heat had finally softened, carrying the sharp, sweet scent of wet earth, blooming wild lavender and fresh, growing alfalfa. Clara stood on the expansive, polished wooden porch of her newly expanded, beautiful ranch house, watching her daughter, Elias, laugh joyously while riding a magnificent, healthy chestnut mare across the vibrant, deeply watered fields. Clara wore a beautifully tailored dress of deep, warm indigo cotton, a delicate shawl draped elegantly over her shoulders to ward off the slight, cooling evening breeze. She was 43 years old, and the silver streaks in her dark hair only added to her striking, regal and profoundly peaceful beauty. The heavy wooden screen door leading out to the porch opened quietly behind her. Elias Thorne stepped out, his tall, broad-shouldered frame commanding immediate, quiet respect. At 51, the master engineer was as ruggedly handsome and formidable as ever, his dark hair now entirely silver, his striking pale blue eyes still burning with the quiet, intense intellect and deep, undeniable devotion that had first drawn Clara to him. He carried 2 steaming porcelain cups of dark, strong chicory coffee. Elias walked over to Clara, offering her a cup with a gentle, incredibly affectionate smile. He stood securely beside her at the heavy wooden railing, his massive, warm arm naturally wrapping around her waist, pulling her comfortably and safely against his side. Clara leaned her head against his broad, muscular shoulder, sipping the hot, fragrant coffee, looking out at the endless, lush and deeply watered expanse of their beautiful, untamed valley. The new shipment of heavy iron piping arrived at the town depot this morning, Elias murmured, his deep, rich baritone voice vibrating comfortingly against her shoulder. The men are eager to expand the eastern canals tomorrow. The valley has never looked so incredibly, beautifully alive, Clara. If you believe that absolute, beautiful karma always collects its massive debts in the end, hit the like button right now. Type justice in the comments to celebrate Clara's final, absolute victory. Let us know what country you are watching from today. Clara smiled, her dark eyes reflecting the golden, magnificent light of the setting southern sun bouncing off the rippling water of the canals. She turned fully to face her husband, her hands reaching up to rest gently against his strong, warm chest. I sang the song to the earth, Elias, Clara whispered softly, her eyes locked onto his, shining with absolute clarity and deep, abiding love. But you wielded the iron. You broke the stone and gave me the magnificent, deep ocean to finally grow our masterpiece. Elias smiled, his large, warm, heavily scarred hands gently cupping her face, his thumbs lightly, tenderly tracing her cheekbones. You were always meant to build a lush, green empire, Clara. I am merely incredibly honored to be the man standing beside the river. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a slow, deep, profoundly romantic kiss that tasted of sweet coffee and the absolute, unshakable certainty of their shared magnificent life.